Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel, Dr. Coco's Metabolics. Today I'm going to be going over acid-base states, and this one's not so much a mnemonic as the way I go through these questions. I actually love getting these types of questions on UWorld and NBMEs and STEP because it's almost like a puzzle trying to see, okay, what's going on with this patient? What is the problem? Are they acid, in an acidic state, or in a basic state? And it might sound silly, but I like these questions because they make me feel the most like a doctor, because most of the time when they're like, oh, this patient, what nerve or muscle or blah blah blah, and all these biochem things, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna use glycolysis to save this patient. Well, no, that's not true. Like, that's stupid. So let's get started. First, I want to tell you that there's these 3 key points that I want you to keep in mind for every single question. First is that carbon dioxide is an acid. Okay, carbon dioxide is an acid. Bicarbonate, or HCO3, is a base. And your normal pH is 7.4. This is actually something they give you, but the questions go by faster if you can just remember 7.4 is your normal pH. And honestly, this is really all you need to know as far as like base memorizing. Everything else you can reason out on these questions. So first, okay, we have this patient, blah, 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 whatever symptoms, I don't even care. Let me just look at these labs, right? I'm so excited to look at these labs. Their pH is 7.2. And I just told you normal is 7.4. So their pH is low. Bicarb is 12. And CO2 is 25. Okay, what does this mean? First, look at the pH. Their pH is 7.2, so that's low. So that means they're in an acidotic state, right? Lower the pH, the more acidic they are. And so, okay, now we got to figure out, is it a metabolic acidosis or is it a respiratory acidosis? And if you can remember, the bicarb is a base and CO2 is an acid, then you can figure this out really easily. Okay, so we looked at the pH at 7.2, we're acidotic. And what makes something acidotic? Either a low base or high acid. And that makes sense, right? You either don't have enough base to stabilize your pH to normal 7.4, or you have so much acid it's overwhelming your system and your pH is gonna be lower. Okay, so let's look at this. Which one do we have? Do we have a low base or do we have a high acid? Well, our bicarb's low, so we have a lower base, and our CO2 is low, so we have a low acid. Okay, so that means that our body is in a acidotic state because it doesn't have enough base. Okay, and if you want to take this a step further, you can say, okay, is our body compensating for this? So we're in this acidotic state because we don't have enough base. We have a low amount of base. Another way we could have been in an acidotic state is if we have a high amount of acid, but we don't. We have a low CO2, so our body is actually compensating for the fact that we're acidotic by lowering its CO2. And so one way we could have done that is if we want to lower the CO2, maybe our body is hyperventilating and trying to get rid of that CO2. So this person, because we have a low bicarb or a low amount of base, we're in a metabolic acidosis with a respiratory compensation. Okay, so let's take the same blah 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 patient, whatever, I don't care, and I'm going to change the pH but leave the bicarb and CO2. Okay, so our pH is going to be high, so we're in an alkalotic state. Okay, we're more basic, and everything else stayed the same. So what makes something more basic? Well, a lot of base or a low amount of acid. And these two, I just left the numbers the same to make it easier on us. So our bicarb is low and our CO2 is low. But we are in a alkalotic state, so that means that because we have a low amount of acid, we are in respiratory alkalosis. Okay? And that makes perfect sense. We're in a or basic state, meaning we have not a lot of acid, and CO2 is an acid. So the fact that we have a low amount of acid means that it's a respiratory because it's low CO2. Okay? And because our body has a low amount of bicarb as well, contributing to the fact that, so we're in an alkalotic state, right? And normally that, if it was metabolic, they would have a high amount of base. But we don't, we have a low amount of base. So our body's trying to compensate by getting rid of bicarb. So this would be a respiratory alkalosis with metabolic compensation. Okay, hopefully that helps. I know this isn't a mnemonic, but I think if you think of it as a puzzle and go through the steps. So first look at the pH. What are you doing? Are you alkalotic or are you acidotic? And what causes you to be in those states? Would it be a high base or low base, high acid, low acid? And sometimes I even write this down, like I write the steps down just to help me figure out what's going on and how to get to that answer choice that they want. And these answers, it would help to write it down because a lot of the time on STEP they like to give these as arrow questions, and I really struggle to like keep up with the arrows. So yeah. Last thing I would go over is anion gap, and I hate to do this. I hate being the one that's like, oh, just memorize a mnemonic. But the two mnemonics that they have in first aid I actually think are really good. And I went through these like once a week during my dedicated. I would just have somebody ask me, okay, what are the things that are normal anion gap? What are the things that are high anion gap? And you can go through it like once, maybe twice a week, and you'll know it for your exam. But if you have a metabolic acidosis and you want to know if there's an anion gap, I would also memorize this formula. And that is sodium subtracted by chloride plus bicarb. And if you know anything about math, you know, like you have to do certain ones first, like either subtraction or addition or whatever. I don't actually know the order anymore. But if you didn't have the like chloride plus bicarb in the little parentheses right there, then your brain would probably do sodium minus chloride first and then add it to bicarb, and you get like a different answer. That kind of helps me remember the fact that like sodium is subtracted by the things that are added together in the parentheses. Dumb way of memorizing it. And then go through normal is 8 to 12, and that's hard ass in first aid, versus high anion gap is greater than 12, and that's the mud piles mnemonic. Go through those once a week if you can. I promise they do come up on STEP. They love to ask about anion gaps. It's usually DKA. If I'm going to give you a hint, they always ask about DKA, and that would be a high anion gap metabolic acidosis. Hopefully this helped you, and if it did, please like and subscribe to my channel.